Ah, come closer now, come closer. The fire burns low, and the shadows grow long upon these walls, but that is fitting, I think, for the tale I am about to tell you. It is not a tale of sunshine and laughter, though such tales have their place in this world. No, tonight I shall speak of darker things, of corruption and cruelty, of twisted forms and blackened hearts, of the enemy's greatest crimes against the free peoples of this world. You have heard of Orcs, I am certain. Who in Middle-earth has not? Those foul creatures that lurk in the mountains, that pour forth from caves and ruins when darkness falls, that serve whatever cruel master promises them blood and plunder. But do you know what they truly are? Do you understand the horror of their existence, the tragedy that lies at the very root of their being? Then listen well, for I shall tell you of Morgoth, whom the elves name Melkor, the first and mightiest of the Dark Lords, and of the unspeakable deeds he wrought in the depths of time before the sun and moon first rose in the sky. In the beginning, before the world was made, there was Eru Elvator, whom men call God, and the Aina, the Holy Ones, who were the offspring of his thought. Among these Aina was Melkor, and he was the mightiest of them all. To him alone on his brethren was given a portion of all the gifts and powers that Ilvatar had distributed to the others. He had knowledge of flame and heat, of cold and ice, of the earth and the sky, of water and wind. In beauty and in might, he was second only to Ilvatar himself. But here lies the tragedy, the seed from which all evil in our world has grown. For Melkor was not content with what he had been given. He desired more. He wanted to create, not as a craftsman shapes material given to him, but as Elvatar himself creates, bringing forth new things from the void. He wandered alone in the empty spaces beyond the world, searching for the imperishable flame, the secret fire that gives true life and being to all things. But the flame was with Elvatar and always would be, and Melkor's search was in vain. This fruitless seeking bred in him impatience, and impatience turned to resentment, and resentment festered into pride. When the Aina sang together in the great music, the song through which the world was envisioned and shaped, Melkor wove discord into the melody. His voice rose against the harmony of his brethren, seeking to drown out the theme of Ilvatar with his own design. 3 times Ilvatar arose and began a new theme, and 3 times Melkor's discord assailed it. Yet in the end, Ilvatar revealed that even Melkor's rebellion would serve the greater design, that discord itself would find resolution in the final movement of the music. But Melkor understood this not, or if he understood, he did not care. His pride had become his master. When the world was made and the Vala, those greatest of the Aina, descended into it to prepare it for the children of Elvatar. The elves and men who were yet to come, Melkor came also. But while the other Vala worked to shape the world according to the vision they had seen in the music, Melkor sought only to claim it for himself. Whatever his brethren built, he sought to mar or to destroy. He raised up mountains only to throw them down. He filled the seas with storms. He quenched the lights that Vardar kindled in the sky. For countless ages this strife continued, and though the Velar were many and Melkor was alone, his power was so great that often he prevailed against them. He delved deep into the earth, raising up mighty fortresses from which to wage his wars. The first was Utumno, in the uttermost north, a labyrinth of tumbers that plunged far beneath the frozen wastes. And there, in those lightless depths, Melkor began his most terrible work. Now I must tell you of the elves, the firstborn children of Vatar, for to understand the horror of the Orcs, you must first understand what was lost in their making. The elves awoke by the shores of a great lake, beneath stars that had never known the light of sun or moon, for neither yet existed. They were the fairest of all the children of Ilvatar, immortal within the circles of the world, possessed of grace and wisdom, craft beyond the measure of men. Their eyes reflected the light of the stars, their voices were like music, their laughter like silver bells. They loved all beautiful things, and in turn, all beautiful things seemed to love them. The trees bent their branches to shade them, the waters grew calm beneath their boats, the beasts of the wild approached them without fear. But Melkor knew of their awakening, oh yes. His spies had watched from afar, and even as the Valar debated how best to protect these new children, Melkor's servants were already at work. Some elves who wandered far from their kin vanished in the darkness and were never seen again by their kindred. What fate befell them none knew, and a great fear fell upon the firstborn. They whispered of a dark rider, a hunter in the night who carried away the unwary to some doom beyond imagining. And those whispers spoke truer than they knew. Here is the part of the tale that I would spare you if I could, but you must know it. You must understand what Melkor did, for only then can you truly comprehend the nature of the enemy we have fought for so long. Those elves who were captured by Melkor's servants were taken to Utumno, to the deepest and darkest pits beneath his fortress, and there, over long years of torment and corruption, Melkor twisted them. By what foul arts he accomplished this work, none can say with certainty. Some speak of dark sorceries, of poisons that seeped into flesh and spirit alike. Others say he broke their wills through endless torment, remaking them in the image of his own malice. Perhaps it was all of these things and more besides. What is certain is this from the elves: the fairest of all races, Melkor the Orcs, the foulest. He took beings of light and made them creatures of darkness. He took immortal spirits and bound them to mortal flesh, that nothing but pain and hatred. He took the children of Elveta and made them into mockeries of themselves, into slaves who knew no master but fear and desire and nothing but destruction. Think on that for a moment. Sit with that horror, as I have sat with it through long ages of the world. Every orc you have ever seen, every twisted face and cruel eye, every snarling mouth and clawed hand, was once going to be an elf. Somewhere, in the depths of time, there was an elf who first woke by starlit waters, who looked up at the sky with wonder, who loved and loved, who might have walked in bliss forever. And that elf was taken, and broken, and remade into something that would have horrified their former self beyond all measure. This is the true nature of Morgoth's evil. He could not create. That power was denied him, though he sought it endlessly. But he could corrupt. He could take what Elvetar had made and twist it into something new, something terrible, something that served his ends. He was a vandal of creation, marrying what he could not match. And the orcs were his masterwork of destruction. They were numerous beyond counting, for they were quickly in the darkness. They were hardy, able to endure conditions that would slay men and sicken elves. They feared the light, yes, but they could move beneath it when need drove them. They hated all things that were fair and free, but none more so than the elves from whom they had been wrought. Perhaps some memory stirred in them, some echo of what they had lost, and that memory fed their hatred until it burned like a fire that could never be quenched. Let me tell you of the battles that followed, for war came swiftly once Melkor had forged his dark army. When the Valar learned of the elves, they made war upon Melkor to protect them. They came against Utumno in their might, and the earth shook with their striding. The sea rose in great waves, and the lands were broken and reformed. Melkor's forces were thrown down, and Utumno itself was destroyed, its towers cast down, its pits filled with ruin. But Melkor had another fortress, Angband, in the mountains that would later be called the Iron Mountains, and though it too was broken, its deepest vaults remained hidden. And when Melkor was taken and bound and carried away to endure 3 ages of imprisonment in the halls of Mandos, many of his servants escaped and hid themselves in those vaults. Orcs crept through the darkness, masterless but not destroyed. Creatures of shadow and flame lurked in the depths, waiting. And there was Sauron. Ah, I see you started that name. Yes, Sauron, whom you know as the Dark Lord of this age, the maker of the One Ring, the enemy of all free peoples. But in those days he was but a servant of Melkor, the greatest of his lieutenants, a Maya spirit who had fallen into the service of darkness. He was cunning beyond measure, and patient as only an immortal can be patient. When his master was taken, Sauron remained in Angband, hidden from the searching eyes of the Valar, keeping the flame of evil alive until Melkor's return. For return he did. After 3 ages of captivity, Melkor seemed to repent. He humbled himself before Man, the Lord of the Valar, and begged forgiveness. And Man, who was without malice himself, and could not fully comprehend it in others, believed him. Melkor was released and dwelt for a time among the Valar and the elves who had journeyed to the blessed realm. But his repentance was feigned, his humility a mask. All the while he walked in seeming friendship, he was planning, scheming, weaving lies and sowing discord. He whispered doubts in the ears of the elves, turning brother against brother, kindred against kindred. He coveted the Silmarils, the great jewels wrought by Efanor, for in them was preserved the light of the trees that illuminated the blessed realm, and that light he both desired and despised. In time Melkor struck. With the aid of Ungoliant, a spirit of darkness in spider form, he destroyed the two trees, plunging the blessed realm into shadow. He slew the father of Efanor and stole the Silmarils. Then he fled back to Middle-earth, to Angband, and there he set himself up as king of all the world. It was then that the elves named him Morgoth, the Black Enemy, and they have called him by that name ever since. The Orcs were waiting for him when he returned, and so were the Balrogs, the Valarukka, spirits of fire that had been corrupted long ago. He raised Angband Inu, greater and more terrible than before, and above it he piled Thangorodrim, 3 vast mountains of slag and ash from his forges. And from that fortress he sent forth his armies to conquer all of Middle-earth. Now I come to the trolls whom you asked me about, and whose story entwined with that of the Orcs. The trolls were not made from elves. As far as any know, they were made later, in mockery of the Ents, the tree herders who guarded the forests of Middle-earth. Just as Morgoth had twisted elves into orcs, he twisted something, some base creature or perhaps something of the earth itself, into the trolls. They were great lumbering beasts, strong as skin, like bark or leather, stupid and cruel. They knew no love, no pity, no mercy. They knew only hunger and hate. But unlike the orcs, the trolls had a fatal weakness, one that Morgoth could never fully overcome. They turned to stone in sunlight. The light of day, which they had never seen in Morgoth's pits, was poison to them. A troll caught in the open when the sun rose would freeze in place, becoming a statue of itself, never to move again. You have seen such statues, perhaps, without knowing what they were. Great boulders in odd shapes, standing alone on hillsides or in forest clearings. Not all the trolls turn to stone, of course, but some are, reminders of battles fought long ago, of creatures that underestimated how swiftly dawn can come. There were many kinds of trolls, for Morgoth experimented endlessly with his creations. There were cave trolls that lurked in the deep places, massive and slow but terrible in their strength. There were hill trolls that roamed the highlands, hunting by moonlight. There were stone trolls, the most common kind, whom you might encounter even today if you wandered too far into the wild places of the world at night. And later, much later, Sauron bred the Olog Hai, a race of trolls that could endure the sun, though they loved it not. These were the most terrible of all, for they combined the strength of trolls with cunning that approached intelligence. And they served the Dark Lord with fierce loyalty. But that is a tale for another time, for the Olog Hai came in the Third Age, and I am speaking now of the first of the wars against Morgoth. Oh, but those were bitter wars. The elves who had returned to Middle-earth in pursuit of Morgoth fought against his armies for century after century. Battle after battle was waged, and the land itself was scarred by the conflict. Great elvish kingdoms rose and fell. Heroes whose names are still remembered did deeds of valor that have never been surpassed. Let me tell you of the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, for it shows more clearly than any other the nature of our enemy and the tragedy of those times. The elves and their allies, which by then included men who had journeyed from the east and joined the war against Morgoth, had planned a great assault on Angband. If they could coordinate their forces, if they could strike together from all sides, they believed they could finally overthrow the Dark Lord. Messengers were sent, plans were laid, oaths were sworn. Hope, that most dangerous of emotions, began to stir in hearts that long known only grief and toil. But Morgoth's spies were everywhere, and treachery was his word as much as steel. He sowed distrust among the allies. He delayed some armies with feints and raids. And on the day of battle, when the forces met on the plain of Anfoglith, before gates of Angband, everything went wrong. The battle lasted for days. Wave after wave of orcs poured forth from Angband, more than anyone had imagined possible. For Morgoth had been breeding them in secret, building an army so vast that it defied all estimate. The elves and men fought with desperate valor, but they were outnumbered beyond hope. And then came treachery. Some of the men, those who had been seduced by Morgoth's lies, turned on their allies at the crucial moment. In the chaos that followed, the alliance was shattered. The greatest of the elvish warriors fell, not to orcs alone, but to the treachery of those they had trusted. The elves wept as they fled, those few who survived. They named that battle Lyneth Anuidead, the unnumbered tears, and the name spoke true. The hope that had kindled was extinguished. The great kingdoms that had stood against Morgoth for so long began to crumble. Within a few generations, the elves held only scattered strongholds, while Morgoth's power grew ever greater. It was then that Morgoth's corruption spread furthest. His orcs ranged freely across the land, raiding and pillaging. Men who had once fought against him now served him, some willingly, some through fear, some because they had been so twisted influenced that they knew no other way. The trolls walked bold in the long nights of winter, and even in summer they struck where clouds hid the sun. And the worst corruption of all was what happened to the hearts of the free peoples themselves. Fear bred desperation, and desperation bred cruelty. Some elves who had been gentle became hard, showing no mercy to any who once served Morgoth, even those who sought redemption. Some men who had been honorable turned to dark deeds, convincing themselves that such means were justified by the darkness of the times. The line between the enemy and those who fought him grew thinner. And that was perhaps Morgoth's greatest victory. For this is the deepest truth of corruption. It does not merely create monsters out of nothing. It takes what is good and turns it to evil. It takes love and twists it into possessiveness. It takes justice and hardens it into cruelty. It takes faith and corrupts it in fanaticism. The most dangerous servants of the dark are not those who were born evil, but those who once were good and fell. Yet there were some who held true. Let me tell you of them, for their stories give light even in the midst of so much darkness. There was Beren, a man of the house of Beor who loved Eov, an elf maiden of surpassing beauty. Her father, Thingol, king of Doriath, was wroth at this match between his daughter and a mortal, and he set Beren a task he thought impossible, to bring him a Silmaril from the iron crown of Morgoth himself. And Beren went. He went alone at first, into the most dangerous land in the world, with no army at his back and no magic to protect him. Love drove him, love and a courage that defied all reason. But he was not alone for long. Eldithine came after him despite her father's commands, despite the dangers. Together they faced werewolves and sorcery. Together they came to the very gates of Angband, where Eldithine sang a song of such power that Morgoth himself fell into slumber. Beren cut a Silmaril from the Dark Lord's crown a knife, and they escaped. They failed at the last, it is true. The Silmaril was lost, and Beren died, and Eldithine died of grief. But their love moved even the powers of the world. Eldithine came before Mandos, the keeper of the dead, and sang to him, and so moving was her song that he was stirred to pity for the first and only time. Beren and Eldithine were granted a second life together, mortal lives, for Eldithine chose to share in Beren's fate rather than be parted from him forever. And from their line came the greatest hero of later ages, including Aron, whom you know, and Aragorn, whom you shall one day know, if the world goes as I hope it may. There was also Fingolfin, High King of the Noldor, who rode alone to the gates of Angband and challenged Morgoth to single combat. Think on that. A single elf against a Valar, against a being of power beyond measure, who had once contended with all the other Valar combined. Morgoth came forth reluctantly, for even he felt shame to refuse such a challenge before the eyes of his own servants. He was vast, terrible, clad in black armor, wielding Grond, the hammer of the underworld. Each stroke of that hammer tore great pits in the earth, and Fingolfin wounded him. 7 times the elf king's sword bit into the Dark Lord's flesh, drawing black blood that smoked upon the ground. Morgoth was never healed of those wounds. He walked with a limp ever after and suffered constant pain. In the end, Morgoth prevailed, crushing Fingolfin beneath his foot. But the victory was costly, and even the orcs fell silent in wonder at the valor they had witnessed. These tales matter because they show us what we fight for. Not merely survival, though that is precious. Not merely victory, though that is needed. We fight for the chance to be better than our enemies. We fight to prove that love is stronger than hate, that courage can face down fear, that hope endures even in the darkest night. But let me return to the orcs, for there is more to say about them. As the ages passed, the orcs multiplied and spread, when Morgoth was finally overthrown at the end of the First Age. When the Valar came again in their wrath and cast him into the void beyond the world, many of his servants perished with him. Angband was destroyed, and Tangorodrim was broken, and the very land was reshaped by the fury of that final battle. But the orcs did not all perish. They scattered into the mountain and the dark places, leaderless and lost but not destroyed. Over time, they multiplied again. They were never as numerous as they had been under Morgoth, but they remained a plague upon the world. And then Sauron arose. He had hidden himself during the downfall of his master, and for long years he remained hidden still, letting the world forget him. But in secret, he was rebuilding his power. He seduced the elves of a region with false promises, teaching them the craft of ring making while he forged in secret the one ring that would control all others. When his deception was revealed, he made war upon the elves and nearly destroyed them. The orcs flocked to his banner. Here was a master who understood them, who could command them, who gave their existence purpose. For the orcs needed masters. They had been bred for servitude, and without someone to command them, they fell into squabbling and chaos. Under Sauron, they became a force of terror once more. But Sauron was not Morgoth. He was powerful, yes, but his power was a fraction of his former masters. He could not breed armies as vast as Morgoth had bred, and his control was never as absolute. The orcs served him out of fear more than loyalty, and when his power waned, they scattered rather than fight to the last. Still, they remain even now. When Sauron is diminished, they lurk in the mountains. They raid settlements, ambush travelers, kill for sport when they cannot kill for profit. They have become a fixture of our world, as much a part of it as wolves or serpents. And I wonder sometimes, in the long watches of the night, whether there is any hope for them. I know what you are thinking. How could there be hope for orcs? They are evil, cruel beyond measure, incapable of anything good. And yet they were elves once. Somewhere, beneath all the corruption, beneath generations of breeding for cruelty and ages of servitude to evil, might there not be some spark of what they once were? I do not know. No one knows. Perhaps the corruption is too deep, too complete. Perhaps what Morgoth destroyed cannot be restored. But I cannot quite bring myself to say that there is no hope. I have seen too many unexpected redemptions in my long life to close the door entirely. Consider this: the orcs love nothing, or so we say, but I have seen them mourn their dead after a fashion. I have heard them sing, though their songs are cruel and harsh. I have watched them create, even if what they create is ugly and designed for harm. These are not the behaviors of beings entirely devoid of the spark that Elvatar placed in all his children. But perhaps I am an old fool hoping against evidence. It would not be the first time. Let me speak now of the other creatures of Morgoth, for the orcs and trolls were not his only servants. There were wolves, but not wolves as you know them. These were great beasts, intelligent and malicious, bred in the pits of Angband for war. The greatest of them was Carcharoth, the Red Moor, who was fed on the flesh of men and elves until he grew to a size never seen before or since. It was Carcharoth who bit off hand of Beren that held the Silmaril, and in his madness, he rampaged across the land until he was slain at last by Huan, the Hound of Valinor. There were dragons, the most terrible of Morgoth's creations. How he made them is unknown, but make them he did. Great worms of fire and malice, armored in scales that could turn aside any blade, poisonous in mind and breath alike. Glorung was the first, the father of dragons, and he was terrible enough. But the greatest was Ancalagon the Black, so vast that when he fell from the sky, struck down by E.G. Rendell in the War of Wrath, his body broke the towers of Thangorodrim. There were Balrogs, which I have mentioned, spirits of fire corrupted before the making of the world. They were few in number but terrible in power. I have faced one, though I do not speak of it often. It was in Moria, in the depths beneath the mountains, and the battle nearly cost me everything. Such creatures should not be in this world, and yet they are, and we must face them when we must. And there were things for which we have no names, horrors that lurked in the deep places, creatures so twisted by Morgoth's malice that they defied description. Not all of them survived the fall of Angband, but some did, creeping into the dark corners of the world to wait and breed and hate. This is Morgoth's legacy, a world marred by his corruption, filled with creatures of his making, haunted by the echoes of his malice. Even though he is gone, cast into the void beyond the circles of the world, his influence remains. It is in the mountains where the Orcs dwell, in the caves where trolls lurk, in the deep places where nameless things gnaw at the roots of the earth. And it is in the hearts of the free peoples too. For Morgoth's greatest corruption was not in the making of monsters, but in the spreading of fear and hate. He taught us to distrust each other, to covet what others possess, to hate what we do not understand. These are his lessons, and they have been learned too well. But there is another legacy, older and truer. The legacy of Augvata, who made the world and all its peoples, who set within each of us a spark of his own being. This spark cannot be destroyed by any power, not even Morgoth at the height his might. It can be buried, hidden, denied, but it is always there, waiting. I have lived long, longer than you can imagine, and I have seen much of the darkness of this world. I have watched empires fall and cities burn. I have seen courage fail and hope die. I have stood at the edge of ruin and wondered if there was any point in going on. But I have also seen the other side. I have seen courage rise where it was least expected. I have seen love flourish in the midst of hatred. I have seen hope kindle anew from ashes that seemed cold beyond all warming. And I have learned over my long years that the darkness can never completely triumph. Do you know why? Because the darkness has no light of its own. It can only dim light that already exists. Take away all the light, and the darkness has nothing left to be dark against. It becomes nothing. But light exists in its own right, burns of its own fire, shines of its own nature. You can shade it, block it, fight against it, but you can never make it be what it is not. This is what Morgoth never understood, and what Sauron does not understand to this day. They think that by spreading enough darkness, they can extinguish the light forever. But darkness is not a thing in itself, it is merely the absence of light. And light, true light, the light of creation that Ilvatar kindled at the beginning of all things, can never be fully extinguished. This is why we fight, not because we will certainly win, for nothing is certain in this world. Not because victory is easy, for it is hard beyond telling. We fight because the light is worth fighting for. We fight because surrender is the only true defeat. We fight because as long as one candle burns, the night has not won. Now I have spoken much of history, of ancient evils and old battles. Let me bring the tale closer to home, to things you might encounter in your own journeys. The Orcs of today are not what they were in the elder days. They are still dangerous, make no mistake. In numbers, they can overwhelm even well-armed warriors. Their cruelty is undiminished, their hatred undimmed, but they lack the organization and purpose that Morgoth gave them. They squabble among themselves, fighting for dominance, killing each other over petty slights. Without a Dark Lord to unite them, they are a nuisance more than a threat. Mostly. There are still great Orc chieftains who arise from time to time, who unite the tribes by force of will, and lead them in great raids against the settlements of men. Azog was such a one, whom the dwarves slew at the Battle of Aznalbizar at great cost to themselves. Borg was another, his son, whom we faced in the Battle of 5 Armies not so many years ago. These are dangerous enemies, cunning and cruel, and they can marshal armies that shake the foundations of kingdoms. But even they are shadows of what came before. The host that Morgoth commanded would have swallowed Azog's armies like a river swallows a stream. The generals who served the Dork Lord in the First Age would have thought Bolg a minor captain, fit for scouting duties but not for command. We face a lesser darkness now, and we should be grateful for that. The trolls too are diminished. Most of them are stupid beyond belief, capable of being outwitted by even simple tricks. I have heard tales of trolls who were kept arguing until the sun came up and turned them to stone. Trolls who could be fooled by a clever hobbit with quick wits and quicker tongue. In the elder days, this would not have been so. Morgoth's trolls were bred for war, for battle against the greatest warriors of the elves. Those who remain are but degenerate descendants, the dregs of a once terrible race. But do not grow complacent. A stupid troll is still a troll. Its strength can tear a man limb from limb. Its hide can turn aside most blades. And even a simple minded monster is dangerous when you meet it unprepared in a dark forest at night. And there are still the Olog, high to consider, though they are rare. These do not turn to stone in sunlight. These are cunning, obedient, disciplined. These were bred by Sauron for his wars. And if the Dark Lord rises again, they will march in his armies. Pray that you never meet one. Pray harder that you never meet many. I could speak more of the specific breeds and kinds of these creatures, of the differences between mountain orcs and goblins of the deep, between stone trolls and cave trolls and hill trolls. But such details would be of interest mainly to scholars, and I sense you are not in the mood for a lecture. The main point is this: they are dangerous, they are evil, and they must be opposed. But how should they be opposed? This is a question that has vexed the wise for age upon age. Some say that the only good orc is a dead orc, that mercy shown to creatures is folly, that they deserve nothing but the sword. And there is truth in this view, I cannot deny it. The orcs show no mercy, and they understand nothing but force. Every orc is an orc that may return to kill again. In war, such soft-heartedness can be fatal, not just to yourself but to those you are sworn to protect. But I wonder, sometimes, if this view does not play into the enemy's hands. If we become as merciless as the orcs, have we not given Morgoth another victory? If we abandon all compassion, all hope of redemption, do we not make ourselves a little more like the monsters we fight? There are no easy answers. I have struggled with these questions for longer than you can imagine, and I have not found resolution. Perhaps there is none to be found. Perhaps we must simply do our best, fighting when we must, showing mercy when we can, and trusting that in the end, the good we do will outweigh the evil we could not prevent. This is what I believe, that in the long count of ages, kindness matters. That cruelty, even against those who seem to deserve it, diminishes us. That we should never lose sight of what we are fighting for, even in the midst of fighting. It is easy to become hard, to let the necessities of war erode our better nature. It is easy, and it is dangerous, and is exactly what the enemy wants. So fight the orcs when you must. Kill the trolls when they threaten the innocent. Stand against the darkness with sword and spell and every weapon at your command. But do not let the fighting change who you are. Do not let the enemy win by making you into something he would approve of. Now, there is one more thing I must tell you, son. It is perhaps the most important of all. The shadow is growing again. Sauron, whom we thought destroyed, has returned. He lacks the strength he once had, for the One Ring was lost to him, and without his power is diminished. But he is gathering his forces. The orcs are beginning to muster in the east. Dark things are stirring in places long quiet. The Nazgul, his most terrible servants, ride again upon winged steeds that darken the sky with their passage. I tell you this not to frighten you, though fear is a reasonable response. I tell you because you must be prepared. The wars of the past are prologue, the war of the future is coming. And when it comes, Every free person of Middle-earth will have a part to play. You might think that one person cannot make a difference against such vast forces of evil. The armies of Mordor are beyond counting. The malice of Sauron has had ages to fester and grow. What can one person or one small group do against such reckless hate? But I have seen what one person can do. I have seen a single elf, King Woon, the mightiest of Dark Lords. I have seen a mortal man steal a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. I have seen acts of courage and sacrifice that defied all odds and changed the course of history. The great battles are decided by small deeds, often unlooked for. A choice not to give up, a decision to help a stranger, a refusal to despair when it seems the only rational response. These are the hinges on which the fate of worlds turns. Never doubt that your choices matter. They matter more than you can know. So let me leave you with this. The tale of orcs and trolls and the corruption of Morgoth is a tale of darkness. But it is not only darkness. It is also a tale of resistance, of courage, of the refusal to surrender. It is a tale of elves who fought for millennia against an enemy they could not hope to defeat. Of men who joined a war they had no part in because it was the right thing to do. Of bonds between races and peoples that the enemy's malice could never break. This is our inheritance, yours and mine. The shadow, yes, but also the light that opposes it. The corruption, yes, but also the incorruption that endures. We are the heirs of both Morgoth's victims and their defenders, and we carry forward the struggle that began before the sun first rose. It is a heavy burden. I will not pretend otherwise. To live in a world so marred, to face evils so ancient and so implacable, to know that the fight may never truly end. There are days when even I grow wary, when I wonder if all our striving is for nothing, when the darkness seems to stretch forward without limit. But then I remember Beren and Elrithian. I remember Fingolfin standing alone before the gates of Angband. I remember all the nameless heroes whose deeds were never recorded, who fought and fell without recognition, but whose courage made it possible for others to go on. I remember, and I am strengthened, and I take up the burden once more. So must you. So must we all. The shadow grows, but so does the light. The enemy is strong, but we are not without strength of our own. And as long as there are those who will stand against the darkness cannot prevail. The fire is low now, and the hour is late. I have spoken long, perhaps longer than you wished to hear. But these are things that must be said, and must be remembered, and must be passed on to those who come after. The story of Middle-earth is written in such tellings, in the words shared by friends in the quiet hours, in the memories that survive the fall of kingdoms and the death of ages. Remember what I have told you. Remember the orcs and what they once were. Remember the trolls and the horror of their making. Remember Morgoth and his corruption, but remember also those who stood against him. Remember that the darkness is real, but so is the light. And when the time comes, as it will come for all of us, to choose between surrender and struggle, between despair and hope, between the easy path of giving up and the hard path of going, remember this night. Remember an old wizard's voice, telling stories by a dying fire. Remember that you are part of a tale that began before you were born and will continue after you are gone. Be worthy of that tale. Add your own chapter to it. Fight the good fight, not because you will certainly win, but because the fight itself is worth everything. That is all any of us can do. That is all any of us need do. The rest is in hands greater than ours. But wait. Before the fire dies entirely, let me tell you more. There are tales yet untold, lessons yet unlearned, and the night is deep enough for further telling. Let me speak of the different tribes of orcs, for they are not all alike, though all are twisted by the same darkness. In the misty mountains there dwell the goblins of the deep places. They have made their homes in the caverns and tunnels that wind beneath those ancient peaks, hollowing out vast halls and endless passages. They fear the sun more than most of their kind, for they have lived so long in darkness that even starlight seems harsh to them. They are smaller than many orcs, but cunning, and their numbers are beyond counting. Their great goblin, whom we encountered on our journey to the lonely mountain, was a bloated creature of remarkable cruelty, but he was merely one of many chiefs who have ruled those dark kingdoms. These goblins are smiths of no small skill, though their craft is always bent toward cruelty. They make weapons of cunning to blades that slash and tear, whips that draw blood with every stroke. They devise instruments of torture that I will not describe, for some knowledge brings no benefit to the hearer. And they breed churches to serve them. Great wolves called wargs that carry them into battle, bats that serve as scouts and messengers, and other beasts whose origins prefer not to contemplate. The orcs of the northern wastes are different. They are larger, hardier, better able to endure the cold that would kill their southern cousins. They have adapted to their harsh environment, learning to survive where little grows and less lives. These are the orcs that trouble the men of Dale and the dwarves of Erebor, the raiders who sweep down from the grey mountains when winter makes travel difficult and defenses weak. And then there are the orcs of Mordor itself, bred and trained by Sauron for war. These are the most disciplined, the most dangerous, the most unlike the squabbling tribes of the mountains. They march in formation, obey orders, fight with tactical awareness that their welder kin lack entirely. When Sauron's power is at its height, these armies are terrifying to behold. Rank upon rank of black, armored soldiers, bearing the red eye upon their shields, marching in perfect unison toward whatever the Dark Lord wishes destroyed. I have fought against all of these. At one time or another, I have crept through goblin tunnels with my heart in my throat, knowing that at any moment we might be discovered and overwhelmed by sheer numbers. I have stood against the raiders of the north, watching them come over the snowfields like a dark tide. I have seen the legions of Mordor march, and I have wondered how any force could stand against them. And yet they have been stood against, time and again. This is the great truth that the orcs themselves can never understand. They are not invincible. They seem numberless, but they can be defeated. They seem fearless, but in truth they are driven by fear, the fear of their masters. And when that fear is broken, they flee like the cowards they are. Let me tell you of Helm's Deep, though that battle not yet been fought from your perspective. Let me speak of what is to come, or what may come, if the shadows continue to grow as I fear they will. There is a fortress in the land of Rohan, built into the mountains by men of old. It is called the Hornburg, though most know it as Helm's Deep. After a king who once made his final stand there against the Dunlendings who invaded his realm. The walls are thick and high, the gates are strong, and the only approach is through a long valley that any attacking army must traverse under fire from the defenders above. In days to come, I believe that fortress will be tested again. The armies of the enemy will come against it, orcs and worse things, and the men of Rohan will be hard pressed to hold. The night will be dark, the rain will fall, and it will seem that all hope is lost. But hope is never lost while courage endures. I have faith in the hearts of men, faith that when the test comes, they will prove equal to it. The walls may crack, the gates may break, but the spirit within cannot be broken unless it chooses to break. And there are some spirits that will never make that choice. This is what the orcs can never understand. They think that strength comes from numbers, from armor, from the weapons in their hands. But true strength comes from within, from the conviction that what you fight for is worth dying for. An orc will fight when compelled, will flee when the compulsion fails. A free warrior fights because they choose to, and that choice gives them a power that no compulsion can match. I have seen battles where a handful of defenders held against hundreds. I have seen last stands that should have been futile turn to victories against all odds. I have seen courage kindle courage, until what began as a hopeless defense became a triumph that rang down through the ages. The orcs have numbers, they have brutality, they have the backing of powers far greater than themselves. But they lack the one thing that matters most, they lack a cause worth dying for. They fight because they must, not because they believe. And in the end, that makes all the difference. Now let me speak of trolls again, for there is more to say about them. I mentioned that Morgoth bred them in mockery of the Ents, and this is true as far as it goes. But the connection runs deeper than mere mockery. The trolls you see were made from something shaped from some base material, just as the orcs were shaped from elves. What that material was, no one can say with certainty. Perhaps it was stone itself, given a crude form of life by Morgoth's power. Perhaps it was some animal, twisted and enlarged beyond recognition. Perhaps it was something else entirely, something from the deep places of the earth that had never seen the light of sun or star. Whatever their origin, the trolls bear certain marks of their making. They are slow to think, slower even than their movements might suggest. Ideas come to them with difficulty, and once fixed in their minds, those ideas are almost impossible to dislodge. They are creatures of habit, following the same paths, returning to the same lairs, eating the same prey generation after generation. Change is painful to them, almost physically painful, and they resist it with all their considerable might. This is why they can be fooled so easily. A troll's mind, once set upon a course, cannot readily be turned aside. If you can convince a troll that something is so, it will believe that thing long after a smarter creature would have recognized the deception. I have heard of trolls who were convinced that a rock was the chieftain and followed its orders for days, standing in the rain waiting for commands that would never come. I have heard of trolls who were told that the sun had already set when it was clearly still above the horizon, and who were subsequently turned to stone because they believed the lie more than the evidence of their own eyes. These stories are amusing, I suppose, but there is a darker lesson in them. The trolls are what Morgoth wanted all creatures to be: stupid, obedient, incapable of questioning the commands they receive. He could not make such creatures from nothing, but he could corrupt existing beings into approximations of his ideal. The trolls are that approximation, and their existence is a window into the mind of the enemy. Morgoth wanted a world of slaves. He wanted creatures that would obey without thought, work without complaint, die without hesitation when ordered. He wanted to extinguish everything that makes life worth living: curiosity, creativity, love, hope, joy. He wanted a universe of drones, and he would have created it if he could. The trolls are a reminder of what we fight against. Not merely the armies of the enemy, but the vision behind them. The vision of a world without freedom, without choice, without any of the things that make us who we are. Every time we defend our liberty against tyranny, every time we choose for ourselves rather than submit to another's will, we strike a blow against everything Morgoth stood for. Let me speak now of some specific trolls. Individuals, if such creatures can be called individuals, who have left their mark upon history. There was a hill troll at the Battle of Azanobizar who slew Enanin, father of Dilo in Ironfoot, who now rules under the Lonely Mountain. This troll was enormous, even by the standards of its kind, and it wielded a club made from the trunk of an oak tree. It stood in the gate of Moria, blocking the dwarves' advance, and many brave warriors fell trying to bring it down. Enanin challenged it to single combat, and though he was a mighty fighter, the troll's strength was too great. Yet even as he died, Enanin struck a blow that crippled the creature, and his son Dirin finished what his father had begun. There were the stone trolls that I mentioned before, the ones who captured some of my companions on our journey to Erebor. Tant and William, they called themselves, though I doubt those were the names their mothers gave them, assuming trolls have mothers in any meaningful sense. They were stupid beyond belief, those three, and their argument over how to cook their captives gave me the time I needed to save them. When the sun rose, it found them so bickering, and stone they became, and stone they remain to this day. You could go and see them if you wished. They stand in the woods east of Rivendell, three great lumps of rock that look almost like natural formations, until you notice the suggestion of arms, of legs, of faces frozen in whatever expression they wore at the moment of their transformation. Birds nest in their crevices now, and moss grows upon their surfaces. They are a monument to the foolishness that is the hallmark of their kind. And yet, for all their stupidity, they came within hair's breadth of killing several of my companions. Never underestimate a troll. Never assume that because they are dim-witted they are harmless. Their strength is very real, their appetites are voracious, and if they catch you alone in the dark, no amount of cleverness will save you. Now let me turn to a topic I have touched upon, but not fully explored, the matter of corruption, and what it means, and how it spreads. Morgoth's power was the power to corrupt, to take what was good and make it evil. But corruption is not a single act, it is a process, a gradual erosion of what a thing once was. The elves who became orcs were not transformed in an instant. They were broken down, piece by piece, over long years of torment. Their minds were shattered, their wills were subjugated, their very souls were reshaped into something unrecognizable. And this process continues. Every orc that is born, every troll that is bred, is a continuation of Morgoth's original corruption. They carry with them the twisted essence of what their ancestors once were, passed down through generations like a disease that can never be cured. The corruption renews itself, perpetuates itself, spreads itself to new victims when it can. This is why the enemy's servants are always recruiting. Not just armies but minds. They whisper doubts into the ears of the faithful. They offer power to the ambitious, pleasure to the hedonistic, knowledge to the curious. They find whatever weakness exists within a soul, and they exploit it, widening the crack until the whole structure crumbles. I have seen this happen. I have watched good people become servants of evil, not through violence or compulsion, but through a gradual process of temptation and rationalization. It begins with small compromises, a lie told for convenience, a cruelty overlooked, a principle set aside just this once. Each compromise makes the next one easier, until the person who began the process would hardly recognize what they have become. The rings of power were tools of this corruption, and I speak not only of the one ring, though that was the greatest. The rings given to the dwarves awakened greed in their hearts, a hunger for gold that could never be satisfied. The rings given to men promised power and long life, but they delivered only slavery and the living death of the Nazgûl. Even the rings borne by the elves, though they were made without Sauron's direct touch, were tied to the one and subject to its influence. This is the nature of the enemy's gifts. They promise one thing and deliver another. They offer power, but the power comes with chains attached. They offer knowledge, but the knowledge is poison. They offer immortality, but the immortality is a curse. Everything the enemy gives is a trap, a lure designed to draw the unwary into darkness. How does one resist such corruption? This is the question that has occupied the wise for ages without end, and there is no simple answer. But I can offer some thoughts. First, know yourself. Know your weaknesses, your desires, your fears. The enemy cannot tempt you with what you do not want, cannot frighten you with what you do not fear. If you understand what levers exist within your soul, you can guard them, prevent them from being used against you. Second, do not walk alone. Corruption thrives in isolation. When we are cut off from those who love us, when we have no one to question our choices or challenge our rationalizations, we are most vulnerable. A friend who speaks hard truths is worth more than 100 flatterers. Surround yourself with people who will tell you when you are wrong, and listen to them when they do. Third, remember what you fight for. Not just against what, but for what. It is not enough to oppose evil. You must also embrace good. Keep before your mind the vision of the world as it should be, the world of justice and peace and love that the enemy seeks to destroy. Let that vision guide you, anchor you, remind you the fight is worth fighting. And fourth, do not despair. Despair is the enemy's greatest weapon. When we lose hope, when we believe that the darkness will triumph no matter what we do, we have already surrendered. The enemy wants us to despair, wants us to give up, wants us to save him the trouble of defeating us by defeating ourselves. Do not grant him that victory. Hope even when hope seems foolish, especially when hope seems foolish. It is our greatest strength. I have spoken of Morgoth and Sauron, of orcs and trolls, of corruption and resistance. But let me now speak of something else of the future. I do not know what is to come. Wizards are often thought to be prophets. able to see what will be, but this is a misunderstanding of our nature. We see more than most, yes. We perceive patterns and possibilities that escape the notice of others. But the future is not fixed. It branches and twists, shaped by choices not yet made, by deeds not yet done. Even the valor, who see further than any, cannot know with certainty what will be. What I can tell you is this: the darkness is growing, but so is the light. For every triumph of the enemy, there is a corresponding defiance. For every fall into shadow, there is a rising into dawn. The balance is delicate, the scales are even, and the smallest weight might tip them one way or the other. This is where you come in. Yes, you, sitting there in the firelight, wondering what an old wizard's ramblings have to do with you. You are part of this balance. Your choices, your deeds, your courage or cowardice will add to one side of the scale or the other. You may think yourself insignificant, a single drop in an ocean of fate. But oceans are made of drops, and history is made of individual choices. I do not ask you to be a hero. Heroes are rare, and heroism cannot be demanded, it can only be given. What I ask is simpler: be true. Be true to what you know is right, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. Stand against cruelty when you encounter it, even if the cruelty seems small. Show kindness where you can, even when the kindness seems pointless. These are the acts that tip the balance, not great deeds of valor, but small deedness accumulated over lifetime. The war against the darkness is not only fought on battlefields. It is fought in every heart, every day, in 1,000 choices that seem insignificant but are not. Every time you choose truth over lies, mercy over vengeance, hope over despair, you strike a blow for the light. Every time you refuse to be corrupted, refuse to become what the enemy wants you to become, you prove that Morgoth's vision can never fully triumph. This is the legacy I wish to leave you. Not merely tales of ancient evil and old battles, but the understanding that the battle continues, that it is fought in the present tense, and that you are a part of it. You cannot escape this war, for it encompasses everything, but you can choose which side you fight for. Choose wisely. Choose courageously. Choose with full knowledge of what is at stake, and know that you do not fight alone. There are many in this world who serve the light, who resist the shadow, who refuse to bow to tyranny. We are scattered, yes, often unknown to each other, but we are connected by something stronger: proximity or acquaintance. We are connected by purpose, by the shared conviction that some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. Find these allies, support them, and let them support you. The enemy's greatest weapon, after despair, is isolation. He wants us to believe that we are alone, that no one else shares our convictions, that resistance is futile because no one else is resisting. This is a lie. There are more of us than you might think, and when we stand together, we are stronger than any force the enemy can muster. The fire is out now, or nearly so. The embers glow red in the darkness, and soon they too will fade. But other fires burn in other places, and they will continue to burn long after this one is cold, and I am tired, and I have seen more than anyone should have to see. But I am not without hope. I look at you, young and eager and curious, with your whole life before you, and I think, here is the light in the darkness. Here is another flame that will not be extinguished. Carry it well, carry it far, and when the darkness seems thickest, when the night seems endless, when all hope seems lost, remember that you carry the fire, and the fire endures. That is all, that is everything. The tale is told, or at least this part of it. There are other tales, other nights, other fires. But for now, this is enough. Sleep well, my friend, dream of light, and wake to find it real. For as long as we hope, the light remains. As long as we fight, the shadow cannot win. As long as we tell these stories, they live on. And the stories of Middle-earth are far from over. They continue in me, and all who hear them remember. May they guide you safely through whatever darkness lies ahead. May you be worthy of them. May you add your own chapter, your own deeds, your own light to the great tale that is the history of our world. Go now, and carry the fire, for the night is long, but it is not endless, and dawn will come. Dawn always comes, Remember that. Above all else, remember that. The darkness had a beginning, and it will have an end. But the light has no end. The light is forever. Now sleep, and wake to face the door.